Hello, and welcome to another edition of BNEWS In Depth. I'm your host, Rich Hosford. Burlington Public Schools have announced their choice for the new Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Mr. Raymond Porch of Boston Public Schools, a doctoral candidate with over a decade in educational experience. For those who pushed for this position to be created, it couldn't have come any sooner. This has been a year of reckoning of the racism in our country and here at home. First, in the wake of the killings of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor by police, there were Black Lives Matter rallies here on the town common with messages like this.
Don't be afraid to reach out to us if you have any ideas of how our towns can better help serve us, how our schools can better prevent our kids from experiencing racism. Don't be afraid to say it. We are the change. We are the future. And I know this is not the future any of us want to live in. We want better for ourselves and our future generations. I'm tired of talking, and we're all tired of fighting. We want change. We are the change, and we're just getting started.
And then, as the pandemic took hold, acts of racism against Asian American and Pacific Island communities rose dramatically. This prompted an anti-hate vigil here on the town common, with one mother saying that she was glad her son could work remotely due to the fact that he had faced some criticism at school.
Soon after kids started remote learning from home, we started hearing Chinese virus, China virus, Kung flu from the media more and more, which made me think, luckily, Stephen doesn't have to go to school these days. This naming of the virus put us, the Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders community, at risk. As a result, close to 3,800 hate and harassment incidents were reported since last March, and hate crimes targeting Asian Americans spiked by 150%.
It is against that backdrop that Mr. Porch will begin his tenure here at Burlington Public Schools. In this show, we're going to talk to members of the school administration, the community, and the student body about why they push to have this position developed and what they hope it'll accomplish. We'll also have an in-depth conversation with Mr. Porch himself about his experience, his new role, and his goals for it. We have a lot to get to, so let's get started.
I am now joined by Assistant Superintendent of Schools, Patrick Larkin. Patrick, thanks for taking some time and coming in to talk to us about this.
Thanks for having me, Rich.
So I just wanted to kind of start, from, the beginning. Like, how did this position come about, and sort of how was it identified that there was a need for it?
Well, I think we've been hearing for a couple of years from students and staff members that had come to the school committee meeting and advocated for this position as a need based on things they were witnessing, the students in particular, and hearing about, and just that we didn't have a clear enough focus on anti-bias and anti-racism in the district. So they felt there was a need, and they made their voices known.
Yeah, so it was really sort of community and student driven.
Yeah, it was definitely community and student driven. I just want to state a fact, not to be controversial, but the fact of the matter is this was something that was passed at town meeting without the written support of school committee. So that's worth acknowledging, and I think it shows you what can happen when student voice and community voice joins together to talk about an area of need.
Right. And once the measure was passed and sort of things were kind of set up, and you put the call for applicants out, how many responded? Did you get a good response?
Yeah, we were thrilled. We didn't really know what to expect. There aren't a lot of districts that have these positions. There are more and more you're seeing advertising, but we had no idea what to expect. And when we posted and then closed the posting, we ended up with 46 applicants.
And what sort of made Mr. Porch stand out?
Again, it starts with the resume, what's on paper, and his experience in Boston Public Schools doing a lot of the anti-bias, anti-racism, and equity work, really stood out to us. He's doing this in his day-to-day job, and he stated clearly in his letter why this job was important to him, or why he was looking to move from Boston to take on this opportunity. So I think those are just a couple of the things that stood out.
Now, we had talked about how, members of the student body and the community were part of getting this position, but they're also part of the hiring process.
Yes, yeah. Again, we had great stakeholder involvement with parents, with students, with staff members, school committee, throughout the process. So really made sure that I think we had the voices of everyone that wanted to have a voice in this position was able to, in some way, get a question to us or talk to somebody that was part of the process.
And, looking at sort of the need for this position, how did this sort of, this year kind of inform that? We have obviously the Derek Chauvin trial that just wrapped up with about George Floyd. We've seen the rise of kind of racism against Asian Americans. There's been other police shootings. Talk about just how this position will help students kind of navigate a world filled with that kind of information coming at them.
Well, it remains to be seen. Our hope is that this position will support students and staff in, again, dealing with inequities that they see starting here in their district, in their town, and talk about how to support changing those systems that are in place that have been here for a long time to have equitable experiences for all of our students. And from there, once they see how they can do this work on a smaller scale, hopefully that will show them how they can do it on a larger scale as well when they leave our district. But this is not a Burlington thing, but Burlington is a typical school district, and we want to be better than typical, I think. Again, we've heard, going back to last summer, our students on the town common talking about their personal experiences in the district, and that's a failure of the school district. As a school leader, that's a failure for me, that it takes our students having to get up in public and talk about ways they've been harmed for us to take action. So that's not acceptable, and those are things that we need to make sure don't happen in the future.
Yeah, I think that was quite eye-opening for a lot of people, who maybe thought, this is Burlington, we don't have those problems here.
I think that's a lot of communities, but it definitely, for me as a person that's been in this district now 14 years, it was an opportunity to pay better attention, take off any blinders that may have been on, and see clearly that there's some big problems that we need to face here in our district. And they're similar to what a lot of districts have, but I think we're hopefully ready to move forward and take actions. We've made a lot of statements, we've hired a position, but really the success of this is going to come down to actions, and that's going to be dependent on how many voices are going to take part in those actions. This can't be something that's compartmentalized. If we're expecting Mr. Porch to come in and be the Lone Ranger in doing this work, we're not going to be successful. If we think it's just a small group of people that are going to help us address anti-bias and anti-racism in Burlington, then we're not going to be successful. Our job is going to be making sure that we're all growing in our work, we're all growing in our personal work here, and from that point, building better relationships with all of our students and making sure that they truly feel seen and heard. And that's going to take some years. It's not going to be a few months. It's going to be years. But again, we'll see hopefully some concrete actions that are going to start to take place in the very near future. Hopefully we've started those actions already with the hiring of this position. But again, that's not the end. That is the very beginning.
Right. Yeah, it's going to be a work in progress. And I know, he's brought on to lead it, but not to just take it on all by himself.
Oh, yeah. Again, we're thrilled to have somebody that's an expert in doing this work. But again, if he's not supported by the people in this district to do the work, then again, it's not going to be a failure of Ray Porch. It's going to be a failure of Burlington Public Schools.
Now, I know there was, talk, obviously, someone in Mr. Porch's position will do things like training and mediating and sort of helping people kind of, you know, navigate these issues. But there's also a curriculum part of it. Talk about, you know, what kind of the hopes are in that regard.
Again, all of our curricular areas, we want to make sure students have a chance to see themselves, all students. And so again, there's never a bad time to review curriculum. So I think it's not something that's going to take place in a year, but I think over the course of a few years, we'll start to see us, we do this every summer anyway, but I don't know if we have the equity lens on as much as we need to. So again, I'm sure there'll be a curriculum review plan that will be part of our larger plan moving forward, and we'll probably try to look at, you know, one curricular area over the course of a year, another curricular area over the course of another year. But honestly, there's a checklist that we've shared with staff over the last couple of years as part of a state review that all districts go through. That anytime you take out a curriculum unit, there's questions that we should be asking ourselves to make sure that, you know, all parties are represented, nobody's misrepresented in a demeaning way, those types of questions. So again, it's going to be clarifying some things that are in place and tightening up on those as well.
Mm-hmm. And I guess probably, you know, maybe last thing, you know, he starts July 1st, correct? And he's been in, you know, meeting with some school officials and students and members of the community. Just, you know, your impression of you know, how he's going to fit in here.
I mean, first impressions are great. I mean, I think first impressions are why we hired Ray for the job. He's very easy to connect with. He connected with our students. That was a big takeaway from the interview process. And I think staff are going to really enjoy getting to know him as well. So July 1st is kind of, I'm assuming, you know, the first 3 months, 6 months is going to be a lot about him building relationships and connecting with people in different schools and starting to kind of set the relationships so he can do the work that he's going to try to do.
Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting to see how everything goes. I mean, you've been, you know, kind enough to come in and talk to us before the position was even approved, and now, you know, a couple times along the way, and so we'll do another check-in probably in a year or so.
Yeah, we look forward to it. It's gonna, again, it's something, accountability is important, like I said, so I look forward to you asking at the end of this year, coming up, the 21-22 year, what are some of the concrete things that have happened as a result of our having somebody in this position? Like, what has the district accomplished? Again, I want to be clear, not that what has Mr. Porch accomplished. He's certainly going to facilitate a lot, but again, I'm trying to reemphasize that point that this is not something he's going to do alone. So what can we show concretely, and what can we project the following year? Like, what are our priorities? So I think you'll see some important work that's been started and a lot more that's on the radar for us to do in the near future.
I look forward to that conversation.
All right.
All right. Well, thank you once again. I appreciate you taking some time.
Thank you.
And now to get the perspective of a member of the community who is both part of getting this position passed and the hiring process, we go to my conversation with Burlington Against Racism President Martha Duffield.
And I'm now joined by Martha Duffield of Burlington Against Racism, who is another big part of getting this position set up and created and funded and everything else. Martha, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So can you just go over, I know we had you on once before talking about this, but how did you get involved with this whole process?
Well, I was actually involved in two separate ways. So I am the president of Burlington Against Racism, and our group helped get community support for the town warrant process and encouraging our town meeting members to vote for the position when it came through the town side. But also, I was part of the district-wide equity committee, and it was a group of teachers and administrators and students and parents. And so I was able to be part of some of the process on that side too.
And during the whole process, what were you hearing from, you know, Burlington High School students, or the Burlington students in general, about why this position was, you know, important?
Well, I think there's a real need to feel represented and to feel heard and understood by a lot of communities of color. And, you know, when things aren't directly impacting you, it's hard to always be able to empathize and understand. And when there's so many faculty who are white and might not have the same lived experiences, it's harder for those students to feel that they'll be understood and heard. And so I think that the students were advocating for this position. They've been very clear and articulate, which is great, and they've worked together to push this forward. And I think they will have a bigger sense of safety at school, and then they'll be more productive and be able to be better learners.
Yeah. And it seems like the ones that were involved are very excited now that it's coming to fruition. So one of the things that's been going on the last year during this pandemic that we're in, and this was addressed a couple weeks ago in the town common, has been a rise of, discrimination against Asian Americans, Pacific Island communities. Just talk about how, what we've been seeing there just sort of makes the case even more for the need for this kind of position.
Yeah, I mean, anti-Asian sentiment has definitely been around for a very long time. I'm constantly learning new things that unfortunately isn't currently taught in our history. So I actually learned that when slavery was ended, they brought in Chinese immigrants to replace that slave labor with very cheap labor. And it also contributes to the, not viewing Asian Americans as Americans and just as another disposable, type of labor. So I think that there has been lots of cries from the AAPI community towards these issues, but it's definitely been highlighted and had a spotlight shown on it, which is good that hopefully we'll be able to get some more response and attention. Obviously the rhetoric of, the last couple of years, especially since coronavirus has hit, has just exacerbated the incidents against the AAPI community.
And when you mentioned, learning new things, especially, that tidbit of history that you had, it reminds me that this position is not just to sort of mediate or, help people kind of understand diversity, but it's also, taking a look at the curriculum.
Yeah, I mean, this position has got a lot of responsibility. I mean, there are some schools and districts that have a curriculum person only, and so the curriculum modifications will be a portion of Mr. Porch's job. But also, incident tracking and response, so there'll be a centralized way to handle all of these incidents when they do happen. One of the things that we're hopeful will be like an anonymous reporting ability so that people can report things without having to necessarily have to go through the whole process of being interviewed or investigated if they don't want to, but they do want to report an incident, even if they're like a bystander. So it's understanding how that can show the trends over time. So each incident isn't this brand new, oh no, somebody said something racist, as opposed to, yep, we've been tracking it and we can see this pattern and now we can address it. I think for the students of color, like we already talked about, it'll be a great resource. And then for the teachers of color, they'll also have a resource, as well as hopefully we'll be able to make some more recruitment efforts into, obtaining new staff of color and also retaining those.
Yeah, having, it helps the students see more diversity, in the faculty, at the schools.
Absolutely. And
talk about, you were part of the hiring process too, like doing some of the interviews and meeting as part of the community group, which is not something that you usually do for positions. Talk about that process.
I've got to hand it to Mr. Larkin. He really ran a thorough process. He had stakeholders at every stage. He had put together an entire hiring committee where they created questions that were the same for all the candidates. They had their own metrics for how they talked about it and their process for making sure everybody had input. And then there was the second round of interviews that I was part of, where there was a parent group, a student group, and then a teachers group who got to interview the 3 finalists. And it was really nice to feel included. I felt that Patrick was very open to people's ideas, and we actually asked the questions because he had prepared like a form online that if you were interested, so I filled out the form, and you actually got to ask the question that you asked in the form.
Oh, nice.
And so it was nice, and And then, we had a roundtable discussion after, but then also, I had a more thorough one-on-one discussion with Mr. Larkin about, what I felt during the interview. And so I was just really impressed with the thought process that went behind everything and making sure that everyone felt heard, and we were trying to include as many people as possible.
Right. Yeah, it seems like a lot of people were included. Just talk about, you talked to the 3 finalists. Obviously, in the end, Mr. Porch was chosen. What sort of stood out about him to you?
So what I liked about Mr. Porch was that he is definitely comfortable in being in K through 12 schools. He had strong answers to classroom questions and how he would work with teachers, how he would impact the curriculum. I think he also had a passion for students and for BIPOC students. He talked about how he volunteers in his personal time with additional types of BIPOC students, and I just really liked that. I was like, this is a guy who has passion about what he's doing. He's putting his own personal time into continuing this work, and I just felt like he was well spoken and would really be beneficial to the district.
Yeah, I remember when I talked to, when they first announced the choice. I talked to him, and he said he got into education after teaching or coaching basketball, and he realized that he really had an affinity for working with students. So it's something good to see with somebody in a position like this.
Yeah, and I loved the TikTok videos that they did.
Oh yeah.
It was fun, and I felt like it was just such a welcoming way to introduce him.
Now I know that as has been stated many times, this is going to be, it's a new position for the district. It's going to take some time for, the sort of, all the responsibilities to be worked out and, for him to sort of grow into it. But what are your sort of hopes for the next year and then, maybe after a year?
I really hope that our teachers feel more comfortable and feel like they have a resource. There's so many things that go on in our community in the national landscape that I don't think teachers always feel confident about how they're going to address them. And knowing they have a resource where they can just say, hey, Mr. Porch, there was just a mass shooting in Georgia. How should I respond in my classroom? And then they have that resource right there. And I think that will really help teachers feel at ease. I think students will know they'll have safe spaces. They've already started to start affinity groups. And I think it'll really, my immediate hopes are that it will just let everyone kind of take a deep breath and relax and be able to focus on learning.
Excellent. Well, I hope so, and we will be following it along because I know there's a lot of interest in the position, and I'm looking forward to interviewing him again for this show. So,
Excellent.
All right. Well, I appreciate you taking some time and coming down here, and we will probably talk to you again shortly.
Great. Thanks for having me.
And now for a perspective from the student body, we go to my interview with BHS Equity Committee's member, Sarah Shake. Let's take a look.
I'm now joined by Sarah Shake from the Burlington High School Equity Committee. Sarah, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And I know that you've been sort of integral part of this since the beginning. Can you just, let people know kind of what the process was and how, sort of the work that went into leading up to this moment?
Yeah, sure. So I would say that this position has been 2 years in the making, ever since a group of students, including me from the Ideas group, presented to the school committee essentially a list of things that we wanted Burlington to have, including an equity committee, a director of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And since then, we have formed the equity committee, and by working through the committee over the past 2 years, we have created our action plan. And then the first thing that we wanted to do was hire the director of DEI. I would say we prioritized that even more following the George Floyd killing. And so in that time of the year last year, it was very crucial for us, and we knew that this is something that we wanted to focus on. And so we got in the works of it. And we had the proposal to the school committee. We went to the town meeting, got the warrant article approved, and then here we are with the whole interview like processing team, which I was part of, and then now we have hired a director. So,
Yeah, I think one of the things that maybe really kind of let people know that this was an important position was some of this former students who spoke at the Black Lives Matter rally after the George Floyd killing. Talk about some of the experiences that you've heard from other students, either current or former students here at BHS, that maybe people would be a little surprised to hear about.
I actually spoke about these experiences at the town meeting, trying to convince the town meeting members to say yes for the warrant article. And I actually had an entire list of all the experiences that alumni and current students at Burlington High School faced, and it all ranged from whether it was microaggressions in a small classroom to big things that were said in the hallways that really affected students. If I were to give a specific example, I know that microaggressions kind of range from being identified as, or being called as the same name as somebody else in the room who looked like them, or assuming where they came from, what country they came from, or what religion they follow, just based off of their name or based off of their appearance. And then it all just the experiences kept getting worse and worse, you could say, on a spectrum. And something that was really harsh was derogatory terms that was said to African American students and LGBTQ students in our hallways. So all these experiences, they're not mine to say, but I would say that they're what showed the town meeting members and kind of showed what Burlington, why we need this position.
Right. And if anybody watching wants to go and either watch the coverage of the rally or the full town meeting where you spoke about this, they're available on our website and YouTube and everything, so it's out there. You mentioned that you were also part of the hiring process. Talk about how that kind of went.
It was a very unique experience for me because obviously as a student, normally students don't get experience with being on a hiring committee. So it was completely new for me, and I was really happy that Mr. Larkin reached out to me to be part of the team. I was obviously the only young student part of the committee, so it was slightly intimidating and nervous. So I did have to take some time to kind of unravel my own thoughts and get the courage to speak up in front of everybody. But during the entire process, we scanned the resumes, it was all individual work that we did beforehand. And then once the interviews began, I had a really great time speaking with the the candidates that we had, and I was able to ask some questions at the end and introduce myself, which was really nice. And then when the finalists were announced, the 3 finalists, we kind of had a student stakeholder group that also met with the finalists, which was just composed of all students and 1 advisor. And I was part of the student stakeholder group, and to me that was one of the best experiences because we truly got to have a deep conversation with each candidate, and we learned so much more about it than I learned from the the first round of the interviews. So and we had a whole conversation at the end of the interviews where they could ask us questions. We asked them more questions, follow up, and we kind of had a great conversation. So I was really happy to be part of the entire process.
Seemed like a very involved process. Yeah. Well, that's good. And what was it about Mr. Porch that kind of made him sort of stand out to you?
Yeah, so every time I talk about the interviews, I always mention that you get a vibe from different candidates. And to me, I first got that vibe in the first round of interviews because I realized that Mr. Porch was so well-spoken He knew his stuff, and he was just very like, he brought like a great like spirit to like our conversations, and I knew that he would reflect that in our school district. And what also made him really stand out was that like meeting with him in the stakeholder group. During that time, he basically had such an open conversation with us, and he made sure that he listened to each one of our concerns, and he followed up with it. He asked us like what kind of things we would want to see change in the community, in our school. And he basically made us feel as if like he heard us and he appreciated what input we were giving out to him. And he made all of us students part of the group talk. And it was just great. Like, he was funny. So yeah, it had like a great, like, he brought like a very good spirit that I think we need in the district. So yeah.
Excellent. Now, I know it's not going to be, him working alone. It's going to be him working with all the departments and administrators and faculty and students. But what are some of the goals that you hope, for this position?
Yeah, so I think kind of like what the equity committee already started, which was the action plan, which basically like outlined kind of like the steps essentially that we would like to take in order to like take Burlington on our equity journey. And whether it was like curriculum changes, so starting from like kindergarten all the way to the high school, whether it was like the incident protocol, so finding a way for students to like easily report incidents, have them feel heard, and have them feel comfortable with speaking out loud with all of like the things that they have faced at the high school or even like beforehand. So all these things are some stuff that the equity committee already started, and we just need like Mr. Porch to kind of lead the work and continue the work throughout all the different schools as well. And for me personally, I just think that Mr. Porch needs to like I would say kind of be this like comfortable, like bring this like comfortable like spirit into the building so that students feel connected to him, and so that they can like talk to him and he can listen to our own concerns, and so that he can work to improve all the things that we have in the school already.
Yeah, and from everything I've heard in my one interview I've had with him so far, it seems like he is going to be open to listening to students. Like, it's something he seems to prioritize.
Yeah.
All right. Well, before we end, anything else you'd like to add?
No, I guess I would just say that like I'm really excited for kind of like this first process to end. Obviously, this work is not going to stop ever, I would say. It's gonna keep going and adding, and there has been a lot of people who have been working in this for years and years. I know that I've been part of this for like the past 2-3 years, but there have been faculty, teachers, like a lot of like administration who have put hard work into this, and I'm really glad that we hired Mr. Porch, and I wish I could stay to
I know. You get all this final thing when you're graduating.
No, exactly. But it's fun. I'll keep in touch with the school, and I'll make sure to keep in touch with Mr. Porch as well to see anything else that he does, and we hope to do some touring of the schools with him before we graduate. So that's something that we're looking forward to.
That would be good.
Yeah.
Well, it's part of your high school legacy. So. Well, congratulations on getting it done, and good work.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for coming in and sharing your thoughts and experience with us.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. And now, at long last, we go to my conversation with Burlington Public School's incoming Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Mr. Raymond Porch. Let's check it out. I'm now joined by the man of the hour, Burlington Public Schools' incoming Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Mr. Raymond Porch. Mr. Porch, thanks for taking some time and coming and talking with us.
My absolute pleasure, Rich. It's good to see you again, and I always enjoy spending time with you.
Well, I appreciate that. So I just wanted to start off, what was it that, when you saw this position posted that sort of drew you to it?
Well, I have to first and foremost say that the process was fantastic. And Dr. Conti and Patrick Larkin, as well as the parents that were involved and the students that were involved, they did a wonderful job. It was one of the best processes that I've ever been a part of, and I've been in many. So I really appreciated that, the way that it was handled, and it was just a lot of fun. I learned a ton. I was engaged. It was fantastic. In terms of what drew me to Burlington, I think there are multiple elements that played a part. One, I think my great passion for this work, diversity, equity, and inclusion, has to be at the top of the list. I think it's important work. You think about some of the things that are happening across the country. In my career, I've had a hand in a lot of that work because it's important. The other piece is just the timing, and what Burlington is doing at this point is really stepping into waters that are important as a school district, and really trying to do something that's going to change what students' experiences are, and really engage families as well. When I spoke to Dr. Conti, I had a chance to talk to him about what was the driver for him. And he talked about spending time with students who are alum in Burlington, and on the heels of those conversations, feeling like, there were some things that Burlington could do a little bit better. And so at the macro level, he started to kind of think through ways that he could help facilitate that change. And this was, again, based in student voice and his time and reflection, just thinking through those pieces. So it was interesting, as a person who had facilitated some professional development for Burlington prior, to hear, the district leader kind of be reflective that way was impressive. And this was long before, I was even engaged in the process. So I think there were lots of elements like those that played a big part for me. And I think also just the growth and career growth, opportunity, and to be able to be on the ground floor with such a monumental decision and focus on work, to have a chance to play a part in that was also very attractive as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, there was a, Black Lives Matter rally after the murder of George Floyd last summer. And I think that was part of when a lot of former students started talking about their experiences in the Burlington school system, dealing with, aggression or racism. And I think it was pretty eye-opening for a lot of the community. I know I didn't really ask you a question there, but
no. I was saying I agree with you, and I think, like I said, I think that's happening around the country, and I think that when those moments happened, I think people get a chance to do deep reflection about what they want their part to be, and so and as an addition to that response, I think Burlington decided what they wanted their response to be. So I was impressed with that.
Mm-hmm. Now, so for people who haven't gotten a chance to meet you yet, just talk a little bit, if you don't mind, about your background, former work experience, education, kind of how you got into teaching. I know when we talked before, you didn't start off in education.
Correct. So yeah, I'm one of those people in education. I'm sure in your lifetime you've met a couple who came to education in a different way. And I majored in English and sociology in undergrad, and I wasn't thinking about being a teacher. I was focused on, other things and basketball. And I grew to the teaching and being an educator in a really authentic way. When I transitioned into teaching, I transitioned from, working a job, regular job. And for me, I was doing some work in the summer, working with young people. And I was working at a place called Chase. And I was a mutual funds accountant. It was my first real job post-college and basketball career stuff. And, I was doing a workshop around financial literacy with middle school students. And I was fortunate enough to be working with students from the Boston Renaissance. And it was a school that was down on Stewart Street, a Boston charter. And it was in the summer, so I was working. And then I was getting, paid time off because it was, community-based support the company was giving the school. And during that time, I met a wonderful school leader named Dr. Roger Harris. And he had been a principal in Boston for many years. And so, spending time with me working with young people, he was like, listen, you're a natural, as a teacher. And, you're solid with math facts, and you'd be a great math teacher. And I had not given it any thought whatsoever at that point. But over time, I started to think more about it. And I was also coaching, because I played. And so I was like finding ways to give back and work with young people the way folks had, given to me was my focus. And so as I continued to work in an office, I would sit in my, my cubicle and think like, why am I in this building? I need to be working with young people. I need to be teaching and coaching. And so that was the springboard for me. And my first job was at the Renaissance as a middle school math teacher. And so, that's what led me into education. And I started a middle school after school program at the Renaissance. I had all these wonderful opportunities to grow my exposure and my learning about teaching and learning. And, the average, they say, becoming a teacher takes 3 to 5 years to really figure out what you're doing. I probably used up all 3, figuring that I can remember like sweating with a dark shirt on, worried about like kids thinking I was crazy and I know what I was doing. But I always wanted to be in front of them and to get to know them and share what I've learned in my life with them and put it into context around whatever we were, learning in terms of content. So from there, I took it seriously and started thinking about, school, and ended up going to, grad school at UMass Boston. And, while also in leadership roles in Boston at the high school level, at the charter level, I worked in private schools, public schools. I've been fortunate to have so many people see some value in my way of working with students and working with adults, and to, present opportunities that allowed me to go into spaces and contribute and learn. And, I think when I was an undergrad and as a student, I didn't think about education the way I think about it now. I value so much being a student myself, and avid reader, and I consider myself a historian, and just a lot of passion for it. And so continue to get educated, and I was fortunate enough to be in different programs and have opportunities to continue to grow myself as an academic, but more importantly, as a person who's socially conscious and big on community, whether it's mine or other communities, bringing people together and developing young people. Being a part of a process that allows people to be their best is kind of what I'm always in pursuit of, as a learner and as a participant. So went on to grad school, master's in administration, and from there did ed policy, learned a lot about policy, national program through the Rennie Center, and got a chance to be in programs at Harvard University, and just all these wonderful learning opportunities that have been terrific for me to continue to sharpen my tools and be able to contribute in spaces. And doctoral candidate, hopeful to cross the finish at some point in December or January and get that done, get that thing taken care of. But I really enjoy learning, and so for me, it's really helped me, in this career.
I was going to say, it sounds like you sort of have a passion for, just continual, education and lifelong learning.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I just wanted to kind of talk a little bit more about, you mentioned, how the process of, going through the interview process was a positive experience for you. Part of the show, I talked to Martha Duffield, who is one of the members of the community who was part of the hiring process, and Sarah Shake, one of the students. And it's sort of unique to have a school administrator be kind of the interview process include members of the community and especially include students. Can you talk about your thoughts and interactions with them during the whole process?
Absolutely. So I had a chance. It was virtual, so I basically had a night, a couple of hours where I went from one room to another with different stakeholders, and they were continual for, I think, myself and the other 2 finalists. So we were like moving from one room to another, which I thought was very interesting. I'd never done that. And everybody was prepared. They had questions that they peppered and kind of in the hot seat, kind of process. Sorry about that.
No worries.
And so that was really cool. But what I learned was you have in Burlington a wonderful community of individuals who came together to create something new. And the time and the work that goes into that, being a person who's been a part of those processes myself, you have to be able to communicate well, build collaboration, crowdsource people, and have a vision about what you're trying to do, especially something as distinct as this kind of role. I learned through it and prior to it that, parents were involved, students were involved. You had school leadership across the Burlington district involved, teachers involved. And it just really was impressive because that's not an easy thing to do. And so as I sat and listened to the questions, I could hear through the questions, a lot of what the hopes and dreams were, as well as the baseline for why. I tried to listen for what the why was. And what I heard was, we feel like this is our response to what we're seeing. And we know that we are a school district that has elements that we need to address and tackle. And we think that this is a fundamental step in doing that. Like, we don't know what the horizon looks like in terms of like what the end game will look like, but here's what we hope. And so I heard, we want relationships to be stronger. We want to highlight an asset-based difference. What I heard from parents was, we want our young people, our children, because many of our parents were, were represented, as I heard and listened. They told me about my son, my daughter's in grade 2 at this school. My son, my daughter is in 5th grade at this school. I live in Burlington this number of years. They wanted me to know that they were invested in this. And we want the best for our children, and we want the best for our school district. And so that messaging was clear to me. And it was impressive. I think whenever you're invested, you have more opportunity to be successful. And I think that doesn't exclude bumps along the way. I always say commitment is about effort. And if you're willing to give the effort, and it's synonymous with your commitment, there's an emotional connection. And I heard that with the educators. I heard that with district leadership. I heard that with students. And so I was impressed by that. And so I also heard that there were concerns, and the stakeholders wanted to find a way and together to address those concerns. And so I feel like my part of my role is to be a conduit to that continued conversation, as we build structures, as we, look at our processes, as we look at our relationships and communication styles and the other dynamics that we do really well, that we take the assets that we have as a school district and we begin to look really hard at the areas that we want to improve upon or that may be barriers. And we use our assets to reconstitute and rebuild some of those elements that we see as deficits or barriers. And when people are invested, you have a chance to do that. And I heard that throughout my process. I heard that from students. Students want, to have their voices heard. They want to see their peers, no matter where they come from, their socioeconomic circumstance or background in terms of diversity, to feel a part of a community where their way of being is accepted and appreciated. And so I heard that from students. They're clear about that. That's not something that I had, there was a gray area about at all. And so I was impressed with that, inspired by it. So these are the things that really going through that process I learned. And I was so excited about, because when you can approach a difficult kind of build of something, because this work will not always be easy. You have to have a foundation of people who are invested. They have to be committed and a will to be successful and to risk take, to support one another, to ask really critical questions. I see that in Burlington. So how can I not, be impressed by it and excited by it?
Yeah, I think you kind of just answered the question, but I mean, I didn't know, the fact that the position was created in response to students and members of the community pushing it. It wasn't just a, administrative check the box, do a thing, but, I'm sure that must sort of change kind of how you view the way the community is sort of like ready for this position to be filled.
Absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned that. Absolutely. And I would say, in addition, when I'm asked what was a part of the attraction to Burlington, of course, I've read about Burlington. It's one of our better school districts in the Commonwealth, right? In terms of outcomes, right?
Yeah.
I know what the baseline thresholds are socioeconomically for Burlington, right? The number of schools in the district, all those kinds of real concrete didactic elements and data, static pieces about the district, I'm clear about. But what I got a glimpse into was the heart and the thinking, the forward thinking of the school district and the stakeholders who comprise it. And so you go through a process, and as you're going through it, you're thinking through, is this a good fit for me? I'm interviewing while I'm being interviewed. Like that's who this individual is, right? And so as I think through that process, I keep raving about it because I learned about how important this was. And as you said, the why was a collaborative why. We're doing this. It wasn't administration checking a box. It was, listen, this is genuinely what we heard from our young people post their completion of going through K through 12. And we want, in thinking about what was happening nationally, what is happening nationally, we don't want to, be reactive to that. We want to take a stance, act and be proactive and drive our future in terms of this element, these pieces, in a way that makes sense for us as a school district. And so that process said that to me loud and clear. Not all school districts are responding that way. And when I later got a chance to spend time with those young people and those parents as well, you could hear it. And so that's impressive, because that's a commitment and that's an authentic commitment. And so everybody has to respond differently. If we've got parents who are struggling with some of the dynamics that will go into this work, they're not hearing from just Ray Porch or Dr. Conti or Mr. Larkin or just the school leaders in our district. They're hearing from their own children, and from their friends, right? That this is important, Mom. This is important, Dad. And I know it might be different, but we think this is important. And I think you change the landscape when that's the case. And I think people in Burlington are serious about that. And so that was attractive, to me. I want to be a partner and bring what I know and what I've learned, and I want to continue to learn and grow. I think we all want that. And so that's what I'm excited about.
Now you mentioned, events, happening on the national level, and I mean, it's almost too much to keep up with these days, but, with police shootings and a rise of discrimination against Asian Americans and Pacific Island communities, how do those sort of national stories that the students here are, ingesting factor into, what you're going to be doing here in the district?
Rich, that's a great question. And so what I would submit to you is this. The foundational piece to how it impacts the work is really straightforward. Our young people are very in tune with what's happening. They are. Social media, national media, right? Conversations that our young people are having with each other in real time that we are not always privy to. I've been very fortunate to be in education in a way that I've built strong relationships with young people. And there's a delicate balance between really hearing concerns and what they think and being a facilitator in that relationship. So seeking understanding and learning from my own lens and life learning and wisdom and experience, but also being really mindful that I was once a young person as well. And that sometimes listening is far more important than speaking. Creating space for young people to share what's happening with them isn't always about giving them an answer. You know, Paulo Freire talks a lot about being among the people as an educator, right? Being a partner in education and not, approaching education from a banking style, deposits and withdrawal. And so for me, as I think about the national events and what I've heard from young people, right? So my response is steeped in what I know and what I've learned from our young people. Not all, but the ones that I'm engaged with. What I know is this: they want different. They want to be heard, and they want to be a part of the solution. And so, when we're adulting at times, because we do that as adults, right? As a dad, I know I do it. Sometimes it's harder for us because we're further along, and our young people have yet in our minds, to learn the things that we believe that they should know. And so when we do that, as an unconscious consequence, we mitigate the assets that they do bring to the table. That could be assets that we build on top of with our experiences to grow a change or a solution that's inclusive of them. And so for me, I think we have a combination of anxiety with our young people. We have a combination of some fear, some anger, depending on which young people we're talking about, misinformation. I think these are all elements that our young people are experiencing, and spaces where they can do just that, be a part of the conversation, be considered an asset in solution possibilities, right? In the way that they can show up, having an on-ramp to show up the way that they are authentically, and they don't have to be adults. And so these are the things I think our young people are experiencing. And again, back to Burlington in terms of the national scene, I think this step has been, Burlington's demonstrated a willingness to engage just that way, to create something like this role is an actionable step. It's not just words and talking. Like, there had to be a fiscal conversation. There had to be a structural process, a policy conversation. So young people in Burlington had a hand in that. That's real. They had a hand in that. And so we want to build on that. So how do they have a hand in additional things that we do, right? How do we partner with them and talk with them while also allowing them room to grow, right? And they're a conduit for our relationships with our families, who may be on the fence, who may be unsure. When people are unsure or nervous, they push back because they don't know. People are more comfortable with what they know than what they don't know, right? So we work together and build on each other's strengths. We can navigate the challenges in a way that's going to be more useful. It doesn't mean we won't have bumps in the road. So I believe that it's a combination of all those things, in terms of the impact to our young people, what we're seeing nationally. But I think they're the linchpin to solve it. I really do.
Mm-hmm. I want to get a little bit more into just, the position itself. I know that, it's going to evolve over time, and, you're not even here yet, but when you see, coming in the middle of summer, and then obviously when school starts in September, what are you kind of visualizing, like, maybe the day-to-day or the week-to-week? How is this sort of the position going to function, I guess?
So I've ironically enough, I've spent a bunch of time here recently, Richard, building out a 90-day plan, building out a 100-day plan. These are things that, the way that I work, these are things that I do. So that the first order of business is really to hear from all of the folks in our district and across Burlington in general, in and outside the school district, and to get to know people and start to garner a sense of, what people are what questions they have, what are the things that they hope to see happen, and why. More importantly, why. The why is always essential to me. And then to really, kind of have conversations about what is, whether we're looking at programming across our school district. Like, when I say is, I mean factual, not what someone's perspective is. What do the numbers say? What do the outcomes say? Are we proud of those? Do we feel like there are numbers or data or outputs that we aren't happy with? Why? Who's responsible? Who's a participant? Who's collaborating with? So that's a more static, lens that I'll have to some of this work. We'll be talking through kind of what supports I'll need to do that effectively and with fidelity as we unpack, as I learn and listen. And then we'll start to look at, collaborations and what exists at present. I know that there are lots of committees and folks that are invested in this work, some in and outside the school district. And I want to partner with folks, and maybe we're shifting some of the work differently, and kind of that work and how it impacts the school district. Maybe we're bringing some other folks to the table. I'll start to think through, at the school level, what are some of the things that we can do that we're doing already really well, and how we can add value to those things, and really partner with our school leaders as well as with our teachers and students. And what do those collaborations look like? What are the actionable steps? If we implement new, we'll have to spend a lot of time checking in and circling back. If we've had existing, implementation, let's look hard at the results and what are we proud of. And so some pieces will be very technical. And, when we talk about outcomes, there'll be some very directed language that we use about why we're proud of things and what are our long-term hopes for some of the outcomes, whether it's graduation rates, whether it's, who's in what AP course, how are we deciding things? What do our policies look like? And so success sometimes is built on preconceived notions, and we can lose a sense of, what our blind spots may be because we've been successful, right, by what's determined as success.
Certain standards.
But as we start talking about what success looks like around these other areas, are we still having the same definition of success, or is it now a different definition? And if so, why? Right. So these are the results once you unpack some data and some outcomes and synthesize that with where are we going next? Where are we now? Right. And what are the things in between? And so we're going to do a lot of that. And I'm going to, be engaged with a lot of folks. And as I said, we'll figure out what additional resources that are needed in order to do this with fidelity and to do it effectively. So it'll be a process, but it's one I'm super excited about. And I've already got, like I said, a 90 and 100-day plan, and that's just some of it.
All right. I know we're kind of wrapping up, but there is one thing, and again, a little bit more on the technical side. But as they were talking about the development of this position, one thing that came up was, taking a new look at curriculum, to make sure that throughout the grade levels, students are maybe hearing from or reading more authors of, with more diversity, or getting a better, maybe clearer sense of our history. Talk about the importance of kind of taking a look at that.
Absolutely. So here in Boston, I've been fortunate to be a huge part of and have the opportunity to kind of help orchestrate, facilitate, build what we consider culturally responsive teaching and learning. And that work, that pedagogy is comprised of some different elements. So there's a technical piece of like having, literature that's more expansive, as you just spoke to. But there's also a component that's comprised of self-development of the educators that are helping to facilitate those readings, that curriculum. And so that work has to be foundational first. So I have to have a strong sense of my levels of implicit bias and awareness, and understand that there's lots of pieces of curriculum that have been written and that have been built that way, right? Whether it's conscious to me or not, I have to raise my level of awareness around those unconscious bias pieces, right? And then really do that self-development on, okay, so I can see how, when I'm doing teaching and learning, this can land in a way where students aren't getting a chance to see themselves historically. Students aren't getting a chance to see their culture, their backgrounds in an impactful way. And in the construct of public schools, that's been historically what's happened. And so to do teaching and learning that's inclusive of information that's been missed historically sometimes is a challenge for educators. So we will have high levels of professional development that have to do with unpacking those pieces and then reconstructing our approach in spaces where we need to do that more effectively. It's culturally responsive teaching and learning is something that will take a little bit of time. We'll also, like I said, spend time and resources bringing folks in to help make sure we do it well, and that our teachers are a part of their own growth and development. But that we do have a specific plan for that work that I will be unpacking and sharing as we move along.
All right. Well, it seems like you've got your work cut out for you. Well, Mr. Raymond Porch, the incoming Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for Burlington Public Schools, I would like to first say welcome to the district, and also thank you for being so generous with your time and joining us today.
Well, it's been my pleasure, Richard. Like I said, I really enjoyed spending time with you, and I appreciate the opportunity to be able to share a little bit about myself. And I'm excited about the opportunity that we have to do some good work together as a school district. So I really do appreciate the warm welcome from everybody that's reached out, and I'm looking forward to it.
Excellent. Yeah, we are too, and we'll be talking to you over time, I'm sure, and have you back on. All right. Well, thank you again, and we will see you in July.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
So there you have it, a look at Burlington Public Schools Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, the new position starting this summer. I'd like to thank my guests, Assistant Superintendent Patrick Larkin, Martha Duffield, Sarah Shake, and of course, Mr. Raymond Porch, the incoming director. I'd also like to thank all of you for watching. We'll be back with a new edition of BNews In Depth next month, so stay tuned.